Welcome back to Pistons Jack Chats. Well, I'll have a guest from the NBA and Pistons community join me to discuss your Detroit Pistons each and every week. Before we get started, if you haven't already, I'd be super grateful if you could like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. That just helps keep the channel growing. But let's get to it. Today, I have Kyle Metz joining me, aka the Pistons salary cap guru. Kyle, thank you so much for joining. What's going on, my man?
Hey, it's good to be here. Crazy work week. We're getting ready for the holidays, but man, it's what else would I want to be doing on a weeknight? Talking Pistons trades and all the fun stuff. So here we go.
Well, I'm super excited to have you on. We've been talking about this for a couple of weeks now, I feel like, and earlier this week we were a bit concerned we might not have much to talk about today, but it seems like we're still going to be able to get through 5 potential trades here that we could see the Pistons make in the next couple of months before the deadline. But before we get to those, I kind of just mentioned it, but we had a very confusing start to the week with some, I'm just going to call it some transactions from Trajan Langdon, the Pistons front office. Essentially, what happened is the Pistons, they waived Paul Reed. Then they signed Motor City Cruise guard Javonte McCoy, who they then waived and then re-signed Paul Reed. All of this in a nutshell to free up approximately an extra $3 million of cap space, giving the Pistons $14 million of cap space right now, the most in the NBA. Kyle, firstly, thoughts on that and when it was all going down, what were you thinking? And it turns out it was kind of a smart piece of business, but very intrigued for your thoughts.
Yeah, no, it ended up working out well. I think it definitely got my hopes up. I thought something was going to happen imminently. Little did I know it was, again, like it would have functionally had the same effect if they had done something right away or if they had done it. But it sounds like from the reporting that there wasn't anything specific lined up. It was just, to save that 3.8 million, to create 3.8 million more in cap room, which was the most they could create because of the salary cap floor and those rules, which we talked about in other videos and things like that. So it worked out. I'm glad they got him back because then they got the win in Miami, and Paul was not a small part of that. Like, they needed him. So it definitely, when I saw it come through that Javonte had only gotten a partially guaranteed contract, like, it definitely started to make sense. Like, okay, he's not going to be around long either. He's a placeholder. I just didn't think it'd be for Paul Reed the next day, but here we go. So Paul Reed's back on a much smaller number, and they've maximized the cap room the most they can potentially have with the new salary cap floors. And so now they're ready to go into the trade deadline with as much ammo as they can.
And one part, I'm sure you can clear this up, that I'm still a little bit confused about. Did Paul Reed, because he was on approximately 8 million, I believe, before he was waived, does he still get that salary, or is he now just re-signed to a minimum and he loses out? I'm just trying to understand that part.
Yeah, so he received, I believe it was 2.4 million ish of that 7.7 million of his original contract, which was fully non-guaranteed.
Okay.
But every day you're on the roster, you're going to get paid. So he got paid for the days that he was on the roster based on his other prorated salary, which is why they cut him, because that 7.7, if they had kept him through the guarantee date, would have cost them more money in the long run. So they were able to cut him. So he does lose out on a little bit, but he gets that original 2.4. He gets another 1.4-ish million for the contract that he signed to get back up to the salary floor. And so he saw probably just as much, if not more, than he would have seen anyway with this whole thing. It just saves the Pistons from some cap room. But yeah, he didn't get the full 7.7, which he was never going to get in the first place. So
no, that clears it up perfectly for me. And it's, I was confused as anyone. I thought, like you mentioned, it almost seemed too good to be true in a way. We're going to get a big kind of trade this early in the season, but obviously we now know what happened, and it seems like the Pistons are still positioned very nicely to either make a big trade or help facilitate one, which we're going to get into some fake trades here. And recently, I think yesterday, I saw some reports circulating around the Nuggets' interest in Zach LaVine. And I thought this would be a great place to start. A Zach LaVine trade to the Nuggets. And 1 moment. So we have this trade here, Kyle. So the Pistons essentially received Michael Porter Jr. They help facilitate the deal. The Nuggets receive Zach LaVine and Torrey Craig. So they get their star wing, and they also get some defense in Torrey Craig. Then the Bulls get, I guess, some salary cap relief a little bit, taking on THJ, Simone Fontecchio, and Zeke Naji. Just talk me through the thinking behind this one, and then, and how you came up with it.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is where this came from was if the Bulls don't want to take on the long-term Michael Porter Jr. salary, right? The Bulls right now, I think their pick is top 10 protected. Otherwise, it goes to San Antonio. So they're flirting with, hey, we might be winning too many games at this point if they want to keep that pick. And so trading LaVine, in theory, they want cap relief and they want assets. They want draft assets. And there might be some second-round picks that change hands here. I didn't get into that deep of minutia, but no first-round picks are going to change hands here, mostly because the Nuggets don't have any and the Bulls aren't going to send any. So the thought process is, well, we don't want to be good. We want to start losing a little bit and let the young guys run. So the Bulls may not want Michael Porter Jr. Well, the Pistons could use a little more on the wings. They could use more shooting always, and they're looking to shore up, another scorer next to Cade potentially. And Porter Jr. is one of the best shooters in the NBA. He's got size. And so there could be a potential fit there. Now, it does give him a glut at the wings. And so you have some issues with the forward spots with Tobias and Ron and Asar. Like there's a lot of forwards then. But that then also frees you up if you want to move on from one of those guys or move Tobias or whatever, right? That gives you some ammo moving forward with that. And so that's the thought process why we came up with this. So the Bulls get some instant salary cap relief because they're saving $13 million right now. They also get $16 million expiring from THJ. Obviously, they take Tech, who's on a reasonable deal, but next year's salary, and Zeke Naji's obviously on a 4-year deal. So it's not perfect, but they weren't going to get that anyway. And then they send out Torrey Craig on a minimum exception. So Nuggets get their score they want, and they get some wing help, some forward help on the cheap for them.
So I love this because immediately we saw once those reports come out, like the first thing for me was like, wow, this is the type of scenario I think is most realistic for this season, I guess, maybe before the trade deadline. And I know no picks are involved, which kind of goes against what Trajan said, but Michael Porter Jr. is incredibly intriguing because I think what a lot of people will say is the biggest knocks on him are obviously health, first of all. Like he's had multiple back surgeries, or at least one, which is never good for a guy his size. And then the defense. But like you mentioned, this guy shoots the leather off the ball, like career 41% three-point shooter on 6 attempts per game. And the type of shots he takes as well, like he's just going to gun. Like he'll shoot it in your face. He gets so much elevation on his jumper. Like I know him and Tobias, you probably have some real defensive concerns, but you kind of already have that with Tim Hardaway Jr. and Tobias. And like you said, maybe this frees you up to move Tobias this offseason earlier than you would have liked. Michael Porter Jr. is still relatively young. I think this is only his rookie extension deal. So I really like it. Like it's obviously, you don't get the picks, but the Bulls here are obviously the team that it's important that you brought up the fact that the reason for them doing this is a little bit of salary cap relief and being able to be in the bottom 10 to keep their pick. Because just looking at this, it's kind of like, okay, they're not getting a whole heap, but they do then keep the ability, or I guess they basically allow themselves to tank to the bottom of the standings. I'm really intrigued by this.
Yeah, and I think just so for people worried about taking on that much long-term salary, right? Right now, the Pistons are projected to have about $24.8 million next summer. So this would eat into all of that for the most part. But what it does, they still have $2 million in cap room for this deadline. Like this only uses up 12 of their 14 million they have available. And it puts them about $5 million over the cap next summer, which is actually where they perfectly want to be. Like you have to understand, like in terms of building around Cade, you want guys they kind of want to land in that like 5 to 8 million over the cap to maximize their spending and to like maximize their salary kind of logistics moving forward with extensions for Ivy coming up and things like that. If they want to re-sign Beasley, now they can still do that using his non-bird rights and things like that. It opens up some other things for them. And so I think it doesn't hurt them to be over the cap and to use all of that cap room now on a player like Michael Porter Jr., who they're not going to be able to find a guy for $24 million next summer. Those guys just don't hit free agency the same way. And so having salary eaten up now where you're over that, and then you can start utilizing the bird rights and some of those salary to make deals in the future. That's kind of the thought process on a lot of these deals is how do we use this cap now on a high expensive guy that allows us to flip other guys later to get the next thing or to start adding things. And then I'll say one more thing. It doesn't have the picks in it, but Trajan wants to get assets. That doesn't necessarily mean picks, right? And so he wants to get assets. And so being able to flip Tech and Hardaway, who's expiring, into a guy who's one of the best shooters in the league on a salary that you can throw into any deal, he becomes expiring in 2 years. He's only got 3 years left. So, if you want to go hunt Devin Booker next summer, you have some requisite salary to do that without gutting your team. And so that's the thought process. It's an asset.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because I probably should have read this out before, but Michael Porter Jr. is averaging basically a career high, 19 points. He's giving you 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 51% from the field, like I mentioned, 39% from 3. Like, this is a real offensive weapon. Like, I feel like he automatically becomes your second option on this team based on this deal. And when you talk about the salary, we've discussed kind of what a Jaden Ivey extension could look like. Now, this was a couple of weeks ago. He's since kind of struggled a little bit, but we were kind of discussing in the ballpark of like 35 to 40 million annually, just due to like how the cap's going to raise. So this deal starts to even look even better as the cap raises. So really important context there from you. But I really like this trade. Like if this was presented and this was pulled off tomorrow, I would be pretty excited and over the moon.
Yeah, I think I would like it as well. I definitely don't hate it. So
I think MPJ fits really nicely with Asar. Like those two complement each other pretty well in terms of strengths and weaknesses. So I think that as well is another huge tick.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on. I'm going to get to another Bulls-centric trade here, and this is the Zach LaVine deal you prepared. As you can see here, similar outgoings for the Pistons in THJ, Fontecchio. You throw in a young guard in Marcus Sasser and kind of filler with Wendell Moore Jr. I don't want to be disrespectful, like he's been solid, but that's kind of what this is. Then the Pistons get Zach LaVine, Javon Carter. When you sent this one through, that was the name. I was like, he would be super useful. And then Torrey Craig. So this deal seems kind of slanted towards the Pistons, but I want to hear your thoughts on it.
It is. It really is. And I would in this deal, I would have the Pistons. I would be comfortable with the Pistons sending up to 3 second-round picks with this deal to get this done. Because they're not really sending out any young players. I mean, Marcus Sasser kind of, but the Bulls already have a bunch of guards. So like this was literally how do we make the salaries work for LaVine? That's what this is centered around. And so I think the Pistons send out at least 3 second-round picks, and I think it's worth it. If they do that, like I would be over the moon. Because what you're doing in this deal is, again, you're sending out some expiring, you're sending out some low salaries. And a lot of it's filler. Like the Bulls are going to have to cut a player. Part of that also is sending Javon Carter and Torrey Craig. Like the Bulls would have to cut like 3 or 4 players to make this work, which is part of why you're seeing a lot of the trade market for LaVine is really challenging because the only way to get him is if you have high salary players to send back, which the Bulls don't want. And so you're going to have to do some of these gymnastics. And so what this has the Pistons basically using all of the tools at their disposal. They're using all of their cap room. They're using their room exception to get Javon Carter, and they're getting a minimum salary exception back for Torrey Craig. So that's how this is all working out. It backfills some of the depth by you replacing THJ and Wendell Moore with Torrey Craig as like wing depth I don't know if he'll even play, but he's there. He's a guy I've been eyeing for a couple of years now, just to have a defensive guy on the wing. Jabon Carter helps with the point guard situation, which becomes less important now that LaVine's there, because you're always going to have one of Cade, Ivy, two of Cade, Ivy, and LaVine on the floor at all times. Like, that's how you'd play that, but he's there to settle things down if need be. And you're not having to give up any of your young core guys, like, in this deal. This is a steal of a deal for the Pistons, even if they send out 5 second-round picks. Like, this is a steal. And I think, regardless of LaVine's contract, all that stuff, like, so LaVine is the perfect offensive complement next to Cade in terms of a backcourt partner. Now, you could argue whether or not you'd rather have a wing scorer. I think that's where the league really is going. That's more ideal. But in terms of a guy next to Cade, he can shoot, he can handle the ball, he can pass the ball, he can get to the rim. Like, he's a 3-level scorer. This would unlock so much for Cade in terms of the offense. And it would give you even more opportunity to bring Asar into the starting lineup with Tobias and even Durant. And it kind of, and he's passable defensively. He's not terrible defensively. So I love this for the Pistons. I love LaVine as a target. This is like the only good way to do it without having to dump real assets. And we can have a conversation whether you trade Ivy for LaVine or not. I think I'm not there, but this is the way to do it. And so that's kind of where I've landed. It does eat into a lot of the cap room next summer. But again, that's not a terrible place to be, because they still have other ways to add salary and to get things done.
Yeah, I think as well, like, I agree with everything you're saying, but like, going back to the MPJ one as well, like, I know LaVine is still kind of considered, would you call him a negative asset, or is that too harsh? Like, because of that contract, like,
the way the league is talking, it seems like there's no market for him. I don't think he's a negative asset. I don't think his contract's big, but again, the Pistons don't have anyone they're going to spend that money on anyway. So like, it does not matter.
So when we just look at this deal here, it's like, obviously you throw in those seconds, but there's a real chance like you can flip LaVine again in a season or two. Like, I think even I've been guilty of this. I can get too caught up in like, it has to be the young core, like, all grow together. But you can bring in LaVine, who I think is he 29? 29 at the moment.
Is he?
I think he is. I think he's yeah. He's been around for a while. Maybe I'm a year or two off there, but you still can bring in a guy for a year or two and then potentially flip him again. And I know that's obviously a risk, but at some point, like, you do have to make some kind of move, like, because it's very, very rare, like, that you have an Oklahoma City situation in the 2010s where you just luck out and draft 2 to 3. Well, they drafted 2 to 3 MVPs, but like, that is so extremely rare. So you're going to have to flip these young guys and consolidate at some point. And I know LaVine right now isn't the hot name, but I will shout out Kuka Hill from Locked On Pistons. So I'm sure everyone knows, like, he spoke about this with Bryce and Amari on the Motor City Hoops, Pistons Pulse a couple of weeks ago about like, the perfect time for the Pistons to capitalize is when these kind of all-star fringe talents or past all-stars are at their lowest value, because no one's going to sign here. Like, and the Pistons right now don't have the assets to go and get a real star if they were to become available and made sense, because they owe. So I like this deal.
Yeah, and these are the kind of moves, again, like, it does put them close to the luxury tax. It'd be about just under 12 million away from the luxury tax next summer. And so whether they would want to use that full non-tax payer mid-level, like, that could potentially push them the tax. But there's ways to get around that and get off salary. Like, I wouldn't really be worried about that. It puts them in position to be able to flip guys and to add more things and gives them more ammo. And this is the type of deal they need to make. This is the type of deal that Stan Van Gundy made all the time. Again, Blake trade aside, like, being able to get Tobias for Irsan, a broken down Jennings, and a second-round pick, like getting Marcus Morris for a second-round pick, like, those are the kind of things, like, Stan Van Gundy took a paperclip and turned him into a starting power forward, like, multiple times. And like, that's what Trajan needs to do here. The key is, because you have Cade, like, the issue with, and I don't want to get too derailed, but it didn't work for Stan Van Gundy because they didn't draft well and they didn't have a superstar, but you have that in Cade. And so if you can do those things on the margin and add those values slowly but surely, that's how you get into a position where, okay, Devin Booker's asking out because he's tired of all the crap in Phoenix and he wants to come to Detroit. Now you have the salary and the extra capital to do something with it because you're trading 2 real NBA starters for him plus things, not just hopes and dreams. So this is the kind of thing that you need to do. Again, if his knees blow out, it could backfire, but it's a 2-year contract. At the end of the day, or like there's like 3 years or 2 years in a player option, right? So like it will not be that long. It doesn't hamper you that long.
Yeah, and like I'm becoming more like obviously there's an injury risk with LaVine, there is with Ingram, like and some of these other guys. Like at some point, like MPJ, I just looked up, he's played I think over 60. He had played 60 games, then 70 games last season. Now he's played 24 of like 30 odd. So like there's a risk associated with any of these guys. That's kind of why they're available.
Exactly.
So everything can't be perfect. So if the Pistons could do this trade, I kind of feel like Chicago might say no, but they could say yes. They could say yes. I'll be all in on this.
The one caveat I'll add to this. Okay, so this is the thing with any LaVine trade. He has a 15% trade kicker, which means he can add like whatever he's still owed, he can add 15% onto that up to his max salary. So his max salary in this would actually be $49 million, and it would like prorate to the rest of his contract. And so it doesn't actually work unless he waives his trade kicker with this setup. And I'm not sure he would do that for Detroit. He might waive it if he's going to Denver, but if he's coming to Detroit, he might want all his money. So that's where the things get tricky with Zach LaVine is that trade kicker. And so you'd have to figure out something with that.
Okay.
So sorry, I got us all excited, and I forgot that's the one Debbie Downer with the LaVine trades at this point.
No, that's okay. We get I think we'll just important piece of info, but I'm gonna move on because we've still got 3 trades to get through here. The next one, this one's spicy. I think this will create some discussion. A trade between the Washington Wizards with Troy Weaver in their front office and the Pistons. So the Pistons get Jordan Poole, Jonas Valanciunas, Patrick Baldwin Jr. For THJ, Simone Fontecchio, and Jalen Duren. Talk us through this one, Kyle.
Yeah. I'll give Q credit for this. Poole's not on my radar, but it was on Pistons Twitter. He was talking about it, and I saw guys commenting, so I went and looked. And I think this also potentially fits a lot of needs for the Pistons. Jordan Poole is a heck of a scorer, right? And I think, and he's, you can talk about character things and all this other stuff. He's not the guy. I don't think he's doesn't have the makeup to be the guy, but with Cade, he doesn't have to be, right? Like he's got Cade is such a good leader and distributor. And he's another guy who can pair next to Cade well. He can shoot the ball. He's having a down year this year a little bit, I think, but overall, people respect his gravity from a shooting perspective. He can play make a little bit. His defense isn't great, but again, neither is Ivy. So but he's a much better scorer at this point in his career than Ivy is. His contract is not terrible. It's not super long. So again, it's mostly around Jordan Poole, but you're getting in this trade, you're upgrading. Basically, you're upgrading from THJ to Jordan Poole, like in terms of like a starting player, right? Ivy maybe moves to the bench and becomes your true 6th man at that point. Allows you to bring Asar in because the spacing is going to be better, things like that. You're also trading out Duren. You're upgrading Duren for Valanciunas, who's just more established at this point, and who can be like, he is what Duren is, but better, I guess. And it's like he's not a spacer, he's not a vertical threat, so that's when you lose in that. But he is a guy who can play solid minutes at the center and be respectable. And then Baldwin's just salary filler at that point, but it's just another like wing depth. So the Wizards might do this because they're getting an expiring contract in THJ. They're getting Tech on a good deal. They can always flip later. And Duren is like the young player here. And they're getting off of salary, long-term salary. They're already terrible. Again, this is something where I'd be willing to send maybe 2 second-round picks with this. to get this done. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't know if it's like a big needle mover for a lot of people, but it's a sneaky solid way to kind of consolidate some guys that you're not sure about and give you a stopgap at center until you find that true rim running defensive presence to pair. And I think Jonas can kind of fill that gap.
So, you know what? Like, so Jonas to me is like, I think he could really work with Detroit. Yes, he can't really shoot it, but it's more about his skill and touch around the rim and the fact you can throw the ball down to him. And I know that kind of messes with spacing a little bit, but I think where, the difference between him and Duran is like, you can legit pass it to Jonas Valanciunas, and he can score at the rim. Like that to me, when you talk about front court scoring and the lack thereof it that the Pistons have, like Jonas this season's giving you 12 points, 56% from the field. Like he's never been a high volume 3-point shooter, 91% from the line. He rebounds, and he's just a really good stopgap. And like you said, and that contract is very reasonable. I'm just checking his age now, but he is currently he's 32, but I'm not too concerned about injuries or anything with him. So
the way he plays is very sustainable.
Yes,
and he's steady.
Exactly.
You're not going to get the highs and lows that you're getting with Duran right now. And yes, you'd be giving up on Duran. You just hope Weaver's still in love with him and has enough pull to say this is an asset we want and they would like him next to Sar. I will say Duran next to Sar. Go ahead, Jack.
So that's what I was just going to say, because Sar is like a really good rim protector, but he is so skinny. They need help on the boards. The Wizards, I could really see them doing this with maybe just 1 second because you get off that Poole contract because, like you said, like Jordan Poole is a very good scorer. The reason those percentages are probably down is just because he's playing out of a role he shouldn't really be in. My thing with this trade is, if I'm being honest, I like the idea of Jordan Poole. I would be worried about, if Jordan Poole was traded to the Nuggets, to a more established team with more star veterans, I would actually really like it. I know this stuff can be overblown, but I would just be concerned bringing him into the Pistons environment that still it's much more stable now. Like you can see the vision. And it's not anything against Cade's leadership. I just would be a little bit concerned about him and his role with the Pistons and maybe it not working out.
No, that's real. The culture thing's real. Now he has a championship experience, and so that is something where it's does that play to help the team? Or is that going to be negative where he again thinks I've been there before, y'all need to listen to me, and that you never know with these guys. It also helps that he's a Michigan guy. I think there's also a thing there. So, it'll be interesting. I too worry about the culture thing. I don't expect this to happen, but I definitely think it's something that there's a way that you could get there. And it doesn't kill them next season again with the cap. It only puts them $2 million over the cap next summer to start. And again, so you're nowhere near the luxury. It gives you another salary to play with if you need to.
For sure. But I do agree with you on the Jordan Poole and his actual skill set would really help this team. It's just, for me, it's the context and environment. But I'm very intrigued. This trade, out of all of them, I want to hear people's thoughts in the comments. Because I think I didn't really see it on Pistons Twitter, but I'm sure there was some really good responses in there. Moving on, Nikola Vucevic. So recently there's been news that now the Bulls are after a first-round pick. After a few weeks ago, it was more 2 seconds. So I've kind of dialed back my expectation on this one happening, but definitely still worth discussing. So this trade here, obviously the Pistons send out Jalen Duren, Marcus Sasser, and then the Pistons receive Nikola Vucevic and Javon Carter. I think this is a pretty fair trade, Kyle. Keen to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to get a first-round pick for Vooch. I don't care what – I mean, it's that season. They're talking high. That's what they want. They're never – look, if they get a first-round pick for Vucevic, it's probably heavily protected or it's kind of a fake first. It's like one of those it only conveys if this and that and this, and it turns into 2 seconds after a year. I don't think that's going to happen. But yeah, for this in particular, they get off a ton of money this year. They're getting 2 first-round draft players, so for what it's worth. Again, I think it gets off some long-term salary because both Javon Carter and Vucevic are 2-year deals. So they get off $26 million in cap next summer. And I have Duren, who will be in his last year of his rookie. Sasser still got 2 more years. Now, they may not want to have to make the decision on Duren that easy, but it gives them a young center to grow with the rest of their team. They're investing in their young core. And so it's a fresh start for Duren, and they get off a lot of money for these guys. I think Vucevic, and I think they know, I think we all know that a plummet is coming, right? Like, he's having a career year, and his value isn't going to go up because of that. That just doesn't happen. He's a known commodity, and he was terrible last year. So there's always that, like, is he gonna, and I would like to see the Bulls include probably a second-round pick in this deal, but I don't think it's going to happen. But I think for the Pistons, it's a solid. You get a center who can shoot, so you get to see that, and you get a backup point guard that can help when things need to happen. This uses all of their cap room and the mid-level exception. So they're working into breaking into that mid-level exception that they have. So that's just something to be aware of, but it works, and I think it could be a good use of their resources. But it'd be interesting. I think Vooch is the most attainable. It's just a matter of whether they want to move on for Duren or not. And I don't know. I think the Bulls could be interested in him because I just think they have a hole there for him to slide into. And at the very least, if they don't like him, they don't have to sign him. They can let him hit restricted free agency and go on from there.
Because this is something we've discussed a fair bit on the post-game live streams. Is the important thing to remember with Duren is, like, if the Pistons aren't going to extend him or don't like what they're seeing so far, the best time to trade him in terms of getting value back is probably this deadline. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, unless he's really going to rehab his value. But then again, you're having the conversation about signing him anyway. So, like, yeah, I think doing it now teams are going to be more likely to want him now than even if he starts playing better over the summer. Like, in my opinion, because then they have a year and a half to evaluate before they have to sign him.
Because that's the important thing, I feel like, with this, because I know a lot of Pistons fans will look at this and be like, why are we giving up on Duren for a third? I think Vooch is like 32, 33-year-old center who, yes, is playing well, but at the end of the day, it's not really a long-term solution. But that's like that you've raised that point with me that we just discussed multiple times on the streams. And I think it's important because teams like Jalen Duren still has value. I don't think he's a lost cause, but from what we've seen this season, it's hard to think his value's probably ever been lower. So I think, though, the Bulls, like you said, if they make this deal, they get a full season and a half to make a judgment. And then they obviously they lose Vucevic, but who knows what they're going to get? They might only get a couple of seconds. So I think this deal makes a lot of sense for both teams. And I would, if you said this trade happened tomorrow, it would tell me that obviously the Pistons are pushing for the play-in. I feel like that would immediately tell me that they are going all in on play-in or playoffs potentially. And I think Vooch would really help this team this season. I'd be a bit worried about next season, but look, from what we've seen from Jalen Duren this season, I think this deal makes quite a bit of sense for both teams.
Yeah, next season definitely the risk you take with Vooch. I think, and I don't think you'd see this deal get done until closer to deadline. Pistons will have a better handle. Like, they're still on pace to be in the play-in at that point, and they make this deal to, like, solidify that run, and so they don't have to make the decision on Duren. I think this is going to be happen later. Like, they're not going to move on this early. I just don't expect that. So this would be like okay, we're actually in position, but we know we need help because Duren's really losing us games, So
yeah. No, it's going to be interesting. The Jalen Duren thing, like, he's the one player I got no idea what's going to happen. So
yeah, I think the other factor to do with this real quick, and I know we're wrapping up soon, but like the Bulls, again, we're going back to under the assumption the Bulls are still trying to play their young guys and not win too many games. Yes. Like they never really tank, but they don't want to lose that top 10 pick. Like, I just don't see that. And so, like, this puts them in a position where they can let Duren do his thing and figure it out. And they're not going to lose sleep over if it loses them games. And so I think that's the other motivating factor here is that.
Totally. Absolutely. That's definitely a key piece of info. Last trade that you have prepared for us, Kyle. Wasn't expecting this name to come up, but I think considering how the Pelicans have gone this season, can definitely see your thinking behind this. So the Pistons acquire CJ McCollum, Daniel Tice, backup center or a third string center, and the Pelicans get THJ and then a young center prospect, which they kind of desperately need in Jalen Duren. Talk us through this one.
Yeah, I low-key forgot we had this whole month. So here we go. But yeah, I like this trade because the Pelicans are definitely sellers right now. Their season's just been rough, and it is what it is. I don't think they're like trying to get off CJ necessarily, and so this would again be how much they believe in Duren, how much of the Pelicans who need a center believe in Duren. I don't love the pairing with Zion and the guys that they have there, but again, things are shifting. They're making other deals, and I think it gives them a young player to look at. And they save a bunch of money this year, and they get off a bunch of money next year. So I love it for the Pistons because it's only a 2-year deal. CJ is a great scorer. He's undersized, but Cade is bigger anyway. So like you can live with that. This is another one of those situations where if you always have two of Ivy, CJ, and Cade on the floor at all times, like I think that solves a lot of offensive wonkiness that can happen with some of those rotations. It allows you to play Asar. Like we get into that again, like Asar can play and start on this team. Daniel Tice is like more just like a body in this case. It also puts you, if Stu goes in the starting lineup, right, that's a 5-out kind of situation, or you have 4 guys who can shoot in Asar, like, that's a different look. But I think it's going to be intriguing. And I think CJ would help this young group develop. And so that's kind of why I like this deal, and it doesn't kill you, like in terms of cap room. I think technically it'd still be potentially able to be a cap room team with this, but just slightly. So they'd probably operate as an over the cap team next summer if they did this, and try to keep Beasley with his like non-bird rights or something like that. So, I think you probably have to throw some seconds at New Orleans to get this done. Probably 2, maybe 3. So it just kind of depends on how you feel about that. This is kind of like a LaVine trade light. He's cheaper and not as dynamic, but gives you some of the similar things other than like the defensive help.
Yeah.
I could be wrong on that read, but I think that's kind of the thought process.
No, I think you've nailed it. And just for some context, CJ, I actually for some reason thought he was having more of a down season. His issue, like so many of the Pelicans, has been staying on the floor. But he's passed 3 seasons, including this one with the Pelicans. He's given you 21 points, 5 assists, low turnovers, 40% from 3 on 8 attempts a game. Like that's crazy volume and percentages. And then he's pretty solid inside the arc too in terms of creation. So there's concerns defensively, but like you mentioned, that's kind of the beauty of Cade with his size and potential at least to guard bigger guards for the majority of the game. And look, CJ, like it's almost identical to the LaVine scenario for the Pistons. Like you get that secondary scorer, at least for the short term. And like you said with CJ's deal, I actually thought he had another year for some reason, but it's 33 million this season, and then he's expiring next. Is that my reading?
Yeah, it's 30 million next year. So it goes down next year, and then it's expiring after that. So
yeah, and like you said, CJ obviously probably put Ivy to the bench, but his ability to shoot the ball, like Beasley's on a tear, but CJ's a more dynamic shooter, can do way more off the bounce. Like you lose tiny bit of size giving up THJ, but you would immediately bring Asar into the starting group, and the Pistons do have some wings now to play with. So it's intriguing. I will be honest, when you set this one through, I was like, not very interested, but now that we've talked through it and I looked up some numbers, it kind of does make some sense. But I guess what you said there is the Pelicans probably want some second round picks for CJ. So not saying I say no to that, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. I of these 5, which one is your favorite? Like if you had to pick one of these 5 to see happen.
I'm gonna bring it up. I love this one. Michael Porter Jr.
Okay.
And you might be taking the biggest risk with this one, but This one I love. I think part of it is because I could see this actually happening as well. Like I can see the others happening. I think all these are realistic. That's why it's been so fun. But there's something about Michael Porter Jr., his age profile, his size, and ability to shoot. Like long term, he could be your 4-man NSR. Like I can really see that. Obviously, the 5-man needs to be figured out, but this one is probably the one that jumped out to me the most.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's probably also the least likely, but we'll see what happens. Because 3-team deals are just hard to predict. Like that's really what it comes down to. So, but yeah, man, I think the more I've thought about this, like I do really want to see LaVine on this team, but I think if you can get CJ on the cheap, like that threads the needle because he's cheaper this year. There's no trade kicker. It's an easy deal to make happen. It's only a 2-year contract, and he's a professional. Like, so I think there's a lot of things where I'm like, if they could work out that deal for CJ, it puts you at a hole with the Duran stuff, the center. That's where like the other LaVine deal, you didn't give up Duran. So like, you know, you kind of got to see. But I'm also not going to lose sleep over losing Duran. So
I'm with you. Like, and as well, the center position, yes, there'd be a bit of a hole, but I feel like that's the one position on your roster it's best to have a deficiency based on how the NBA's played these days. But I really like the LaVine one as well. And that McCollum one is sneaky fun too. But let us know in the comments, guys, your favorite. I'm sure there'll be some really good feedback. But I think, Kyle, you've absolutely nailed it with these trades. This is why you're the guru. Because they're actually, I feel like they're realistic. Like sometimes you see fake trades and it's just like, you know, you see the Lakers jersey swaps and you're just like, that's just not going to happen. But I genuinely, like, these are all realistic. And I guess that brings me to kind of, we're going to wrap it up here in a minute. But what do you think the Pistons do at the trade deadline? I've asked you this multiple times, and it's. But just give me a prediction.
I'm gonna sneak in an answer. Some other things. One thing to watch for. This is.
Yeah.
I think the Kings are sneaky as one of the like Brandon Ingram options, and so if the Pistons can sneak in and get Keegan Murray, and like to eat some salary, because I don't know how they'll do it, but that's something I would like to see potentially too. Is if they can pull Keegan Murray back in a deal with the Kings, mostly because New Orleans already has a bunch of wings and forwards. So anyway, so that's a bonus answer, but I didn't build something out for that because I haven't really looked into it, but I'd be excited about that. So what I think they're going to do is they're probably going to find some Joe Schmo that makes $13 million or something like that and get 2 more second-round picks and eat it. I think that's obviously the most likely scenario. Like, because if it's get a few assets, salary dump, or get a big swing, it's always going to be more likely that they're going to that smaller thing, just because it's easier to help them to facilitate. Because a lot of these guys do want to go to competing situations. So, but LaVine to Denver is really heating up. So like, and MPJ has to go out in that deal. Like that's the only way that it works. And so it's just a matter of the team wants him. So yeah, I'm kind of copping out, but I think either they eat something for a second round pick or 2. They're not going to get any first round picks. I'm sorry, guys. They're not going to get a first round pick for eating salary. Just not going to happen. That's not the NBA we live in anymore. And so that's the most likely scenario. That's my prediction, unfortunately.
I agree. Well, I think this is where we're going to close it out because you brought up first round pick. There was a bit of chatter about should the Pistons move Malik Beasley. Obviously, I think every Pistons fan, like Malik Beasley, has to be in their top 3 favorite players right now. But from an asset management standpoint, what would you do? Because Malik Beasley's playing like he's on 1 year, $6 million, and he's pretty much giving you 20 points a night on crazy efficiency, high volume 3-point shooter. What would you do? Because it's a real question.
Yeah, it's so hard. It's so hard. I think, unfortunately, because of where this team is at culture-wise, you cannot trade him for a first-round pick. Unless it's like, you know, a lottery pick guaranteed this year. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And even then, they already have too many young guys. Like, we're already talking about having to consolidate. So, like, now, Trajan didn't draft any of those guys. And, like, yes, I think Beasley's a guy that you can continue to keep around. He's been obviously a locker room fit from a culture standpoint. He's shooting the lights out of the ball. He is streaky. He always has been, but he's always been one of the best shooters in the NBA for the last few years. So, like, you can count on that. He's got gravity. I mean, I just don't know how you like if you really pushing for the play-in, you can't do that. And this team has had so much losing.
Yeah.
I think just from a sake of like what you gain in development and what you gain in culture by keeping him outweighs the potential guy that you could get. That's my opinion. I don't know if for Lions fans for the crossover here, like imagine trading Jamal Williams for like a 3rd round pick. If just because they could. They knew they weren't going to go to the playoffs that year, but let's trade him because you would like that's who he is on this team. He's Jamal Williams. He's like the comic relief and the heart, like he's an emotional leader. He's like I see that a lot of similarities, and so I think you do everything you can to get that guy back.
I agree. I wasn't sure we were going to go with this. Like a lot of people will bring up the Bojan Bogdanovic scenario. I think the difference here though is Bojan was a little bit older, but more importantly, I don't think Bojan had any impact on that locker room. Like, yes, he was a professional, nothing negative, but I think, like you said, where the Pistons are at culturally and where they're heading, like if you traded him, I feel like that would really rip the soul out of that locker room. And it, yes, you would get that 1st round pick back, but I mean, I'd be concerned just about like the younger guys and just feeling like they'd lost their kind of their main leadership pillar or whatever you want to call it. Like, Cade's the best player, but I feel like Beasley sets the tone in terms of vibes and just not to mention his on-court play is exceptional. So,
yeah. The only exception to that, again, if you're including him to get a guy that comes, like, if it's Booker, right? If it's a guy, like if he's part of a package to get an all-star level player, sure, okay, that's a different conversation. But if it's just to get a future draft pick to have assets, like I think that just sends the wrong message for this year, unfortunately, and that's just the situation they're in. It's just it's hard because in theory, like you definitely should from an asset management standpoint, but that's not the only thing at play on this team and this year.
I think you absolutely nailed it. Couldn't agree more. That's going to do it, Kyle. Thank you so much for joining. This has been awesome. We're definitely going to get you back on, at least for one more of these for the trade deadline and whenever you have the time. But tell the people where they can find you and the stuff you're working on.
Yeah, you can find me on Blue Sky and Twitter, that comments 23 for another couple months. So, and then I'll be actually going dark. I'm taking a trip for 90 days. So I'll be traveling. So right around the trade deadline. So hopefully I might pop in during the trade deadline, but yeah, so the next couple months, come on, chop it up, do, talk trades. I'll give you everything I can before I have to go dark. So
I love it.
But it's been fun, Jack.
Of course, man. Definitely go give Kyle a follow. A few of these trades here, he posted himself. He's always putting out good fake trades to create real discussion amongst the community. So I appreciate that. But that's going to do it for today's show, guy. If you could please like, subscribe, drop a comment, I'd greatly appreciate it. But if not, thanks so much for watching. And as always, go Pistons. Thanks so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and drop a comment below.